One is
This meeting is being recorded.
Satish, who's my
This
colleague,
meeting is being recorded.
Got it.
and Rashmi, who's my sister-in-law, and many of you know Ajay. So she's his wife and also the same batch as us at IIM Ahmedabad. So welcome to both of you as guests in today's meeting. So with that,
Thank you.
let's begin, Srinivas.
Thanks, Milind. I think we'll get going
Mhm.
for the season 3, session 2 of the 16ers book.
3.2.
In the last 15 years, podcasts have gone from mainly a niche market to mainstream. There's a world of info and entertainment for people of all interests, so listen up. We have Podcast 101 on the lowdown.
There are over 500,000 podcasts in existence, but that doesn't mean we all know what they are.
A podcast is simply a piece of audio, a story or an interview or a documentary series that you can download and listen to whenever you want.
Chris Bannon, Chief Content Officer at Stitcher, a podcast app, is here with a lesson on podcasts. First, where did they come from?
Podcasting has been around for more than a decade, but I would say that it became really popular. It exploded in 2014 with the publication of a series called Serial.
I definitely understand that someone could look at this and say, oh man, he must be lying. It's so coincidental.
And since then, there's now something for everyone, from shows about true crime to news.
From the New York Times, I'm Michael Barbaro. This is The Daily.
And from comedy to fantasy.
What's this one's name? Logan. But he goes by another name as well. Wolverine.
Today, as many as 100 million people are listening each month to the 18.5 million available episodes from the 700,000 podcasts out there. But unlike AM/FM radio, podcasts play through apps. So here's how to tune in.
Stitcher has built the first widely available Android app, so if Apple has an app it's built into the iPhone. Spotify is getting into the podcasting business in a big way.
You can listen on your smart device through the app or on a computer from the website.
If you click that little subscribe button, it will make sure to feed you new episodes of the show.
Which leads us to the third part of the lesson. What are some of today's fan favorites?
Right now, I think there's never been more variety in what's popular in podcasting. Dirty John is a series that came out a couple of years ago.
Whether to intimidate people or to impress them with his dark glamour, he bragged frequently about his underworld ties.
This true crime podcast is also a hit series on Bravo.
I'm John.
People like Conan O'Brien, the TV talk show host and comedian, have gotten into podcasting in a big way.
Conan tends to pop his peas every time he says podcast.
Podcast. This makes the engineer crazy.
Oprah, Dr. Phil.
The hardest part is choosing where to start. That's today's lesson in Podcast 101 on the low.
So VV Kumar obviously is well and enlightened in this aspect, and it's the first time in the book club we are experimenting a podcast listening. So after the session is over, perhaps I think the members can reflect whether it is a good idea, a bad idea, or an alternate idea. With that, we'll move to the next part, is our monthly birthday celebrations. As I was trying to impress upon Milind, November gets the best of us.
There you go.
So we have 7 people celebrating the largest group. And Milind calls it as the Saptarishis. So then we have taken a constellation as our cue. And here are the birthday wishes.
I should add, Srinivas, that the constellation of Saptarshis is not complete without a twin star called Arundhati. So her place is being taken by Rashmi today, who also has a November birthday. So,
Happy birthday.
Thank you. I celebrated with Kumar 2 days ago.
Oh, nice.
It's your birthday. It's your birthday. I hear that it's it's your birthday. The news is traveling far. It's orbiting around the earth and heading to the stars. Happy birthday, the stars sing you a song, and they'll be oh so happy if you will sing along. Used a circle around the moon and gave the moon a smile, and wandered off to Venus and lingered there a while. The Mercury it stayed to see the planet's bashful side, and shadow craters at the poles where ice can stay and hide. Happy birthday, the stars sing you a song, and they'll be oh so happy if you will sing along. And thought it laughed to hear the news and bellowed out a cheer, which sailed upon the solar winds and nearly all a year. The news was just too good to keep, it's heading to the stars, but on its way it gave away to the rovers out on Mars. Happy birthday, the stars sing you a song, and they'll be oh so happy if you will sing along. Jupiter, it gathered steam from Io's orange blast and watched the Jovian northern lights as it went streaming past. The rocky rings of Saturn, they covered in dust, so it took a little shower at the font and Enceladus. Oh, happy birthday, the stars sing you a song, and they'll be oh so happy if you will sing along. It zoomed away to Uranus with its skinny dusty rings, then played a tune on Neptune with Triton singing strings. And now it's passing Voyager, it's left us side behind, and heading to the Milky Way where all the stars will shine. Happy birthday, the stars sing you a song, and they'll be oh so happy if you will sing along.
Great song. Happy birthday, everyone.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, everyone.
कुमुद भाई गौतम कुमुद की शक्ल तो दिखाते हैं.
Yeah, Kumud, I just explained to Milind and Yanks. Kumud और नियति अब भी निकल गए. You know, they just took the car and they've gone to the airport. They're on their way to Ambala. So apologies from Kumud on her birthday month on top of that.
Yeah.
Please wish her.
It's very early, Gautam, for a flight.
No, it's she's left at 7 o'clock here. The flight is at 9:30, so it's okay.
Yeah. Okay. Quick introduction before I hand over to our reader of the month, Kumar. Just a couple of minutes. So education to me is liberty from the tyranny of subject ignorance. This liberty from ignorance is a subset of liberty or freedom as a value important to all life on this planet. And so I'm reminded of a quote attributed to Wendell Phillips, an American abolitionist and liberal activist. And the quote says, "Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty." Karthik Muralidharan refers to education as having the important role of human development, which cannot happen without the liberty that is preconditioned on eternal vigilance, which really begins with the mother, then the father, then doting or disciplining grandparents, and then finally by good teachers, who we always remember not so much for the teaching they did in detail, but for the values that they espoused. What we are debating here, however, is the future of formal education systems in India that really caps this substratum of informal, continuous education that we all benefit from as we are growing up. But the measurements of good learning outcomes resulting from such formal education are often very challenging and perhaps worthy of some discussion from all our reflectors today. The solutions suggested in the podcast and in the readings for this challenge of providing good formal education for next generation Indians are good in principle, but as always, the proof of the pudding will be in implementation. So your thoughts as reflectors and then as listeners in the audience will add to the efficacy during the open discussion that we have in the second half of today's session. And who knows, we might even solve some of the thorny problems that have confronted our education. So with that, let me hand over to Kumar for his overview of the podcast and the readings. Go ahead, Kumar.
Okay. Hi, all. Thanks for indulging me in considering a podcast as possible subject for discussion. I think Milin's set a good stage in terms of what the whole liberal value and the framework around education. I think what the core content is that if you look at what our central obligation as a society is towards the first generation learners. If they're able to get foundational literacy and numeracy skills, then they have the ability to read, to learn. And this, in the case of girls, I think this provides an even higher dividend because then they go on to raise their families, and then they are better situated to do that. So now this might seem abstract, right? When you talk about first generation learners and impact and so on. So I thought about our own family, and basically I think the key moment was when my great grandmother, the lady in the picture, she decided to risk it all by having my grandfather go to Madras to study to become a lawyer. They only had 2 children, and he was the only son. But she decided to risk it, and I think that pretty much was a step change. Because since that generation, again, all of my dad and his brothers were all, college educated and so on. So were all of the sons-in-law of my grandfather. So in that age, I guess it did not extend to the girls. But then subsequent generation, again, education has been, all important. And probably in each of your own cases, if you look back at your family history, you'll probably find what that first generation learner has done. And so essentially with our public education, what we are saying is that the core mission should be the impact, that we should keep that in mind, that the impact we have on the first generation learner. Now, in terms of the structure of this conversation, we have a good set of reflectors. They will talk about the philosophy, the politics and economics of, so essentially set the stage. And then we'll have Chacha talk about some of what our own learning has been post-independence in terms of specific outcomes and experiments that were tried in the public space. Ishan has recap some of the policy recommendations, and then we'll have Gautam talking about his own experience with what he had learned trying in the upskilling and the vocational training. I think Gautam and Swapi had done some work in that area, and he'll probably enlighten the larger group here. And then Iranki has been working on EdTech. So EdTech is a definite that is the digital enablement, and I think there's big upsides there. Karthik talks about an experiment with MindSpark in Delhi that had some good results. So there's a definite potential of how we might be able to leverage that in the larger context. Again, the core being that for the large numbers that are first generation learners, we need to be able to do the right thing by them. So with that, I will hand it over to Suresh. How are we doing on time?
Yeah, we are doing well. Okay. So let's listen to the first reflection. Thank you, Kumar. That was a great overview and an example that illustrates what education can do for a family from your own experience. Thank you. Go ahead, Suresh.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Vivi, for giving me the chance to reflect on this Indian education podcast. So as Vivi mentioned, the guest in the podcast is actually Karthik Muralidharan, who's basically an undergrad and a PhD from Harvard and a master's from Oxford. You can't do better than that. And and he's kind of published articles in top tier economic journals, which is never easy. And he's right now, I think he's a Tata Chair professor at the UC San Diego. So what I'm going to talk to you today it's very briefly is just talk a little bit about what the assumptions underlying his research, and then talk a little bit about some of the work that he's done on the Indian education system and the outcome, very briefly, because all the policy recommendations of that is going to be covered by Chacha and the others. And finally, I'll talk a little bit about the randomized controlled trials, the RCT methodology, and give you an example from my experience of using RCT. So Karthik is a public finance economist, and he calls himself a left libertarian. Again, being from Harvard, that's not surprising. His main motivation is to understand and improve policy goals through research grounded in hard data and evidence using sound methodology. In this case, he uses the randomized controlled trials methodology. He mentions that he kind of plays in the interface of three subjects: philosophy, politics, and economics, PPE as he calls it. Philosophy is determines what kind of society we want. Do we want a capitalistic society or a state-directed capitalism like China, or an egalitarian society, and so on? Politics deals with with the question of how does one come up with a positive sum game given competing interests in society. And the economics, which is what he focuses on, is really a question is a resource allocation problem. How do we optimize the limited resources we have? And his work focuses on this. Just a couple of important points that assumptions that underlies research. One is that he says that you need to minimize the role of the genetic lottery, as he calls it, which is really the accident of birth. So need to level the playing field in which the state plays a major role. However, we also need to avoid the state coercion, for example, through excessive taxation. Another point he makes is the distinction between poverty and inequality. I mean, you can, in fast-growing economies, you can have, as economies are growing faster, the inequality gap can also increase. However, what you should make sure is that the absolute levels of poverty is increasing. So the focus should be on the absolute level and not on the gap so much. The core question in his research is that how do we allocate between public goods that increase productivity and efficiency versus just redistribution of wealth? It's important to note that efficiency is not just an economic necessity, but a moral imperative. Go to the next page. He talks about some of the some issues with the Indian education system, and what he says and what is true is that the first 30 years of independent India was really focused on tertiary education, not primary or secondary education, and that still casts a long shadow. There are two roles of education. One is a human development role, where you impart knowledge, skills, and shared concepts of identity and citizenship. And the second role is one of a sorting function, which assesses and classifies students on the basis of educational ability and achievement. The Indian education system was designed for sorting and not for human development. He looks at some of the impact on the outcomes. So in the last 30 years, the focus has shifted now more to primary education rather than primary and secondary education rather than tertiary. And some of the success measures here are the increased enrollment, construction of new schools, midday meals, etc. And all these are input measures rather than outcome measures. But in terms of outcome measures, despite these massive investments, the impact on outcomes has been very poor, mainly due to bad governance and suboptimal pedagogy. So that it seems as if the investment in infrastructure do not matter. Teacher training has also no relation to student learning as measured by effectiveness in improving outcomes. However, trained teachers in private schools do better, basically perhaps because they work much harder. And Similarly, reducing class size doesn't translate into better outcomes or ROI though investments have gone up. The impact of midday meals has also been very modest. As I said, these are just briefly mention of the issues. I think others are going to go into more details and the recommendations. If you move to the last page, the next page, sorry. I'm going to talk about the randomized controlled trials methodology. All his research that at least in this area have used the RCT methodology. And he mentions that it's really important to have an appropriate methodology to measure and correct the impact on outcomes. So there are several issues when analyzing a problem that he has done. Some of them are that there are too many variables that impact outcomes, and these variables keep changing. You need to isolate the impact of each and every variable on the outcome. And thirdly, probably the most important is you need to separate correlation versus causation. Okay, things moving together is correlation, but causation has to be much more rigorous than that. So therefore, you need to use the RCT methodology, which is the first step in that is to create a control group and a test group. And you match these groups on all variables except for the variables being tested. So in this case, except for the input measures, all the other variables have to be matched so that there is no difference between test and control group, and then use econometric modeling to isolate the test effect. This technique is borrowed from biostatics for clinical trials, and now it's a gold standard among all the social sciences research studies. So in the next page, I'm actually going to give you an example of how I've used it in my experience. The RCT methodology, we also used to call it the matched market test. So essentially, this is not from development economics. It's a marketing example. So here we study the impact of advertising on sales of car audio equipment. So this is a consulting assignment that I did for a Harman industry company called Harman International. Among other things, they also manufacture car audio equipment. So that the problem here is that they wanted to advertise in certain markets, and they wanted to see what is the impact of the advertising on the uplift of this car audio equipment. So the first thing you do is create the test markets and the control markets. So you take a bunch of, so we did this in 4 contiguous states in the US, Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Alabama. So created control markets and test markets. And both these markets were matched on all variables except in the control market, there was no advertising. In the test markets, we did the advertising. And then we observed it for a period of time and then did some econometric modeling to isolate the test effect. So you get the lift, and therefore from the lift, you can calculate the ROI. So this is essentially using the randomized control methodology to study the impact of advertising on sales and other outcome metrics. We looked at foot traffic, and dealers, and so on.
Okay.
So I think that's it. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Suresh. I like the example on RCT that makes the use of it in the context of what Karthik Muralidharan is trying to do against the background of PPE very clear in our minds. So thanks a lot for that. Let's move on to Sandeep, who's going to talk about the new education policy in 2020 from the Government of India and the current state of education. Go ahead, Sandeep.
Yeah, so thank you, Milind, for the introduction. I'm glad you introduced the word formal education into our discussion, because that is what we are really going to discuss. I remember quite a few years ago, there was a discussion going on illiteracy in India, especially of the women. And one of the speakers was Vandana Shiva. And she was very critical of this accusation that the village women were illiterate, because they said they know so much about bringing up their children, running a family, helping their husbands in the farm. And all that is needed to run a household, the woman already knows. How dare you call her illiterate? And that really set many people thinking on how we evaluate the capability of our people, or for that matter, human development. And all these thoughts came to my mind when we started this discussion about Karthik Muralidharan's RCTs and his findings on how much of mathematics or physics that people have learned, and how growing from one class to the next, the students fall behind. Now, what I have done here is that I have gone through the various policy and the acts and try to bring some sense into how the education in future will be. Starting about 200 years ago, if we go back to history, you know, India has always been called the Vishwaguru because of our Vedic literature, Vedic scriptures, and all the discoveries in science and philosophy, and the way to lead a good life, how they were taught to the world and how people learned from India. Now, if you go back 200 years ago, we had Ram Mohan Roy, who was instrumental in kickstarting the Indian Renaissance out of Bengal. That over time spread all across the country, and we witnessed social reforms to provide universal basic education, especially to girls. And we saw at that time schools, colleges, Kanya Pathshalas, hostels for students from official areas sprouting all over the main educational centers. And they were supported with the financial aid from the well-to-do people. Pune, Lahore, Delhi are two cases. You can go back and see how about 100 plus years ago, the people were brought into the cities to study. The talented and ambitious secured admissions, sometimes with financial aid, from prestigious universities in the UK and US. Education became a stepping stone out of the status quo, and through which Indians excelled world over. And V.V. Kumar has given an excellent example about his great-grandfather and grandfather. And I likewise found my grandfather also going through the same. He was orphaned at a very young age, and how, with the support of the larger family, he was able to break through sort of the glass ceiling. Next slide. So prior to the NEP 2020, the Indian education was legislated through the Right to Education Act 2009 and the National Policy on Education 8692. The Right of Children to Free and Compulsory Education Act 2009, that was the name of the act. It covered the male or female children of the age 6 to 14. This act and its precursors led to an input-led funding approach that resulted in construction of school infrastructure, toilets, computer labs, and recruitment of trained teachers. Karthik, through his RCTs, showed that the input-based approach of the government certainly led to an improvement of the gross enrollment ratio in the primary classes, but the learning outcomes were not uniform. This resulted in massive inequalities, and the education system got relegated to a sorting filter, which Dev also mentioned. Thus, instead of achieving full human potential, developing an equitable and just society, and promoting national development by imparting literacy and numeracy, its purpose became to select higher achieving students for higher education and occupations. Next slide. Karthik questions the effectiveness of the education system on several scores, challenging the current policies based on evidence, cost effectiveness, and overall governance. It broadly makes the following recommendations in 7 fronts. 1, the curriculum. It finds the current syllabus content heavy and suggests a new curricular framework that has been proposed by Yashpal Committee, asked to simplify and narrow down the topics. The second is rejig the exam system by making modular assessments using technology-based platforms. I think MindSpark was one of the methodology mentioned, and assess the absolute rather than relative credentials. Third, achieve universal functional literacy and numeracy. This is done through universal preschool education to ensure that better school readiness is available at the grade 1. This will achieve universal functional literacy and numeracy of all school children by the end of grade 3. That's the target. Provide such supplemental instruction for children falling behind in small groups. This is to be done in the preschool level, in Anganwadis, etc. Fourth is universal preschool education to support school readiness with first grade. And this is for the first generation learners, which was also mentioned by Vivi in his discussion. And use the Anganwadi-based model as curricular needs are different from school education. Next slide. Fifth is reform of school training to emphasize pedagogy rather than theory, and the inclusion of extensive practical training. A new paradigm for teacher training and development that emphasizes on practical training through apprenticeship while the teachers are getting their B.Ed degrees. Sixth is private school regulation and RT reforms. This has been, a problem in many forums. Firstly, the regulation should be on disclosures and not on inputs. And secondly, the RT clause 12C, which is contentious, as a de facto stealth nationalizes a quarter of the private schooling capacity without adequate compensation for the socioeconomically disadvantaged groups. Instead, establishing charter schools has been recommended, and this recommendation has been adopted in the form of additional Jawahar Navodaya Vidyalayas and the Kendriya Vidyalayas. Seventh is taking vocational education seriously and need to integrate vocational education into the secondary school curricula through a combination of vocational classroom training and practical training or apprenticeships. This will better serve the millions of students who pass exams but cannot find jobs because they have no real skills. This I will let Gautam speak more because he has experience on this. Karthik has established through his findings in the RCTs that the teacher absenteeism of 25% directly impacts learning outcomes. And instead of increasing pupil to student ratios and teacher salaries, there's need to fill up the key supervisory positions at the block and district level. That, I think, sums up my reflections on this topic. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Sandeep. I think you built up the background to how we can look at the future of education very nicely, and also included the RTE. So with that, we can now move on to look at the policy prescriptions for education, and more importantly, their implementation in the light of what Sandeep has said. So over to Ishan to tell us about policy prescription.
Thanks. Milind, firstly, thank you for choosing a photograph where I still had black hair. It feels good, and a black beard.
That is Srinivas.
Oh, thanks, Yang. So I think that, I chose not to repeat the points in the podcast because I had a glimpse of what Sandeep and they were doing, and I thought it was very well covered. So since instead of going to that, I thought I'd just take a summation of the issues as I see it relating to the subject in terms of what is my previous experience been for something that's so relevant to India, I have been interested and engaged in an advisory capacity for the last few years in both the skilling and education sector. So I thought I would raise some issues from there. One, what I really found interesting in the podcast was approaching education as a key to the human index, with income and health being the other variables. And I think this will definitely lead to better outcomes in the future. The human index remains a constant struggle for India. Everybody speaks of outcomes, but the barometer by which to judge outcomes is unclear. And in fact, what I have seen is that if you put 6 people in a room, they all talk about 6 different outcomes. So I think that the NEP will hopefully help in saying like Vandana Shiva's outcome is different from XYZ's outcome. So that's the first part. The second is, what do we mean when we say we want to move the needle? Everybody talks about moving the needle, whether it's private philanthropists, whether it's the government. Do we need more young people educated and skilled? That is what this podcast actually argues for. Do we need more employable people? Do we need teachers who know how to teach rather than teachers who are qualified? He talks about the eligibility criteria. And, I have seen that increasing supply of educated people without commensurate demand, which he argues for. I've seen colossal failures in the skilling landscape, where everything was linked with how many people were being trained. And Gautam will elaborate much more on that with his experience. But when supply and demand are mismatched and quality is questionable, then education and skilling both become fairly meaningless, because employers demand sorting, ranking, filtration. You can say it doesn't help living, for children left behind, but that's the demand. The country needs poverty elevation. So the question really is that, does this concern education and skilling help alleviate poverty or make recruitment by industry more efficient? Because I feel in education and skilling, the leg that is never discussed is industry, the recruitment people. And I think that they have been fairly dishonest, making somebody else do their work, do their sorting and filtration, and actually reduce the amount of training that they need to do. So that's something to think about. That what does a nation and state do with those left behind? Just as an anecdote, I actually made a presentation to CII to say you guys have contributed nothing, okay, in this whole space of skilling, okay. How do we measure productivity and efficiency of capital and resources deployed? To me, the shocking part is the percentage that goes into what I call the tail, which is the overhead, which is infrastructure, physical, digital, even digital infrastructure. It costs a lot of money. And how little goes into the head, which is support for outcome for students. You could argue that digital works both ways. But what I've found is that people are investing in backbone and not investing in user-friendly stuff for the education. Funny enough, people look at midday meals as the tail. I see it as part of the head because it adds to quality of education through the other variable of health. How do children study well if they're hungry? But the high percentage of teacher salaries is a problem, and the gross efficiency, absenteeism. I've seen that firsthand. And he talks about it. He says 25%, 10,000 crores. He puts numbers on it, which I found interesting. And I don't know whether teacher salaries are now part of the head or the tail. I agree completely that quality is knowledge multiplied by effort. That's a term he uses, which I found very interesting. But again, clear definitions of the required knowledge segment-wise and the required effort are a continuous struggle. Here, some of you were exposed to Manish Sabharwal, who Raghu bought in another context. But Manish has been a vociferous arguer in the NEP for both vocation and for apprenticeship model. And this one that he talks about where the girls in the villages get paid 8,000-10,000 rupees and that reduces, all that is actually part of the NEP thinking through a very strong lobby of committed people in this space of both apprenticeship and vocation. And the Indian Apprenticeship Act actually, they have borrowed from that and put into the NEP, which I think has made the NEP much stronger. I see, friend, that's actually Manish. There are models which have been tried here, like Teach for India is a good example, where outcomes have been measured. In TFI case, it's better English and math scores across the municipal schools over the last decade. So this is a proven model where they take young graduates. All of you know the TEACH model. It's a global model. So I want to elaborate on the model. State versus center. Muralidharan correctly says that the center should focus on policy and funding, state on execution, because execution is the real strategy here. This is where the needle will move, which means a less polarized polity and better center-state coordination understanding. In my limited experience, the states, with some exceptions, Fandina, Rajasthan, etc., so it's not a political issue, it's a state cultural issue, tend to woo the center for funds and then resent any oversight whatsoever, including Maharashtra. I've been in meetings in Maharashtra from the center where all they're saying is, when is the next tranche of money coming? Nobody wants to discuss anything else. That they see as a state subject and they want to guard with their lives. So finally, so many reflections, few insights, but I want to end on an optimistic note. Every small efficiency in such a large area creates huge impact. I believe that this journey has begun and NEP is a step in the right direction. I used to tease the NSDC management. We've got a 5% increase in efficiency through pushing through a more tougher, more accountable budget, and sometimes taking on the powers that be, which actually, if you put it in black and white in the government, nobody wants to put a dissenting note. Nobody wants to just upfront these issues. And through 2 ministers, we did upfront it. And the result in saving can create another Tata Trust. That's the amount of saving. I mean, Tata does so much, and a 5% efficiency in these things can move the needle substantially. So there is reason for optimism. And I believe digitization, and I'm not covering any of these because, Gautam will cover the skilling landscape much better than me. Yanks will cover the digitization, but it's helping not just education delivery, but also monitoring and transparency. It will also help self-learning and continuous learning, which is what is needed in the future. So I'm going to end on an optimistic note and say, I hope, I pray, and I believe that India will improve the human index, education, health, incomes over the next decade. Thank you. Milind, you're on mute.
Thank you, Ishan. I think through the NEP, you illustrated what the policy priorities are, and also that implementation is really like a state subject. And that's something we can deliberate more on when we engage in our open discussion. So thanks a lot for that reflection. And with that, let's move to Gautam and then to Srinivas on 2 areas that they specialize in. And first, Gautam with vocational education and skilling and training plans, in which he and Swapi have contributed a lot in the past years. So go ahead, Gautam.
Thanks, Milind. And thanks, Vivi, Diva, Chacha, Ishan, for your inputs, particularly on the public school system and general education. So I'm not going to cover public school education through the podcast, Karthik, Muralidharan, etc. I'll go straight away into skills, and that might put a little strain on you Yanks, because I won't be following page 1, 2, 3 as I had sent you. Appreciate if you could just, organize it in the manner that I'd like to go through with it.
You just tell me to flip the slides, Gautam, whenever you want.
Yeah, the first slide we can move from straight away after I start. So the first thing I wanted to mention to you guys, something that's not alien to you, is that there has been no focus on skilling as such in primary education in India till date. Now, you have a situation where change is in the offing. I look at the new education policy 2020, and there is an apparent focus on skilling. It's not an obvious focus. What they talk about is an emphasis on conceptual understanding, finding unique capabilities in each student, critical thinking, using methodologies like stories, play, interactive sessions, less reliance on books, and a statement that says that 50% of students will have exposure to vocational education by 2025. Obviously, something that has been pushed a lot by Ishan's friend Manish Sabharwal, who's done enormous work in this area, and I know has been hugely involved in the NEP. But when you say as a government that you have a policy where 50% of students will have exposure to vocational education by 2025, you are talking about 2 or 3 years from today in an economy which hasn't done it in 75 years. How will all this be done? Will states have freedom to teach mother tongues? Will schools use low cost but effective contract teachers? Will NEP spends be cost effective? So these are questions that come to my mind, but NEP does seem to be a thought through proposition. And I believe implementation now is key. But coming back to the overall question of skilling, skilling has been neglected in the past in India, as I mentioned. Look at 96% of South Koreans have some skills training or other by adulthood. 80% in Japan, 75% in Germany, 68% in the UK. And in our case, it's 2% formal and 8% or so informal training. We are way, way behind the rest of the world in terms of skilling our people. They have programs like the TVET program in Australia, which is the Technical and Vocational Education and Training. There are community colleges in the US. Vocational institutes are generally commonplace, and they are seen as separate routes to livelihood vis-a-vis higher education. But our focus from independence has been on higher education as the practically only means to economic benefit and livelihood. Now, we've been successful. We have a lot of successful IIT, IIM, Stephens, etc. graduates. But on the primary education platform, we have been left with A, school dropouts, B, those that did not excel in the filtration system that everyone has talked about, the sorting system that we have. And that in turn then left them with limited options on what they could do with life. Now, it's not right to say that nothing has been done in the arena of skilling. Some work has been done. Two routes that I can talk to you about is first the apprenticeship scheme. You know, it's an act that was first instituted in 1961. There is a new version now in 2016, whereby, bottom line, any company with 30 plus employees must hire apprentices. So they must train apprentices. And up to 15% of the workforce can be apprentices in a company. But the reality of that is that there were just 500,000 apprentices in India at last reporting. Now, how does this compare with the rest of the world? China, with a similar population, has 20 million apprentices. With far smaller populations, Germany has 3 million, Japan has 10 million. Substantially smaller populations. But there is an apprenticeship act, and there is some work happening on the apprenticeship front. The other thing that we have tried in India is the ITIs. Now, the objectives of the ITIs, which is Industrial Training Institutes, is very noble. It is to help Indian youth acquire industry-specific skill sets and thereby help them improve their standard of living and acquire a better livelihood. And ITIs offer career training, 6 months to 3 years, let's say on average, 1.5 to 2 years. And there were, on the 1st of January 2021, as many as almost 15,000 ITIs across India. So one could say that these ITIs offer career training in skilling, and they should have taken care of the void, that I'm talking about, and that I believe continues to exist in the Indian environment. But look at the reality. I told you that there are 500,000 apprentices, and I'm telling you there are 15,000 odd ITIs. But there's a 2015 report on skilled workers needed in 2022, identified as 119 million of them. Now, the building, construction, and real estate sector alone needs 31 million. Retail needs 17 million. Transportation needs another 12 million. There's a huge demand for. But all these ITIs put together, and if you say the average course duration is 2 years, are going to be able to meet only about 4% of this need that has been identified, 119 million additional skilled workers. So obviously there's a lot of work to be done. Now, it is in this milieu that I must tell you that one of the biggest issues with skilling and vocational education is social stigma. No father would point to a building and say, son, go and train in that plumbing institution. It's the best in the country, probably the best in the world. And come out as a graduate from there and be one of the better graduate plumbers in this economy. No son wants to do it. No father wants to push his son into doing that. And it is in this milieu that Skill India came to us around 2012. We had already set up, Ajay Swap and I had already set up GRAS, and we were floundering along, and then came Skill India and NSDC, etc. NSDC, which is the National Skills Development Corporation, the apparent spearhead for skilling in India as promoted by the government of India, said that its primary objective was to train 150 million youths by 2022. In a departure from previous efforts through ITIs, etc., which had long-term skilling, the NSDC wanted to do it through training partners who would offer short-term courses. Now, the biggest problem remained and remains is that neither youngsters nor parents believe it is a good alternate route to earning livelihoods with dignity. The higher education route has been rammed down our throats since 1947, and it's going to take a lot of undoing. And this is where people like I feel government spending should have gone, not into asset building, not into inputs that Ishan identified so nicely, but into changing mindsets, removing the social stigma. And this could have been done. It has been done before. The government of India promoted condom use. If you remember Nirodh, many of us in our younger days, when HIV was threatening to run through the world's population, it should have helped build market acceptance for skilling and vocational education. And as a matter of fact, the company that Ajay and I set up, GRAS, we actually brought in advertising teams, etc. And I remember we were supported ably by Vikram Rai's brother-in-law, Surajit, who's passed away recently. And we brought it in to help in the partnership with NSDC and kind of focus on how to remove the social stigma. But instead of doing that, what skilling in India became is the government role, meaning is 1, policy maker, clear; 2, regulator, clear; 3, monitor and micromanager of the process. Time-consuming reports, massive, but clear, it's a role. And 4, a bank. NSDC became a bank providing debt and equity, and hence a part provider. And one wonders, isn't that a slight conflict of interest? If you're monitoring me and you're monitoring a company in which you have 20%, 30% equity, which is the company that you're going to look out for more? I don't know if this has actually happened, but certainly it presents a situation where I feel that there may be a conflict of interest. So what did training partners suffer from? They suffered from A, student apathy. Students were paying nothing for their training, government of India paid. B, the poor quality of students that were being attracted as a result of the social stigma, school dropouts, failures, lacking functional literacy, lacking numeracy. And these were compounded by whimsical actions by bureaucrats in state skill missions, delays in payments at every stage in the process, impacting cash flows, impacting working capital, and corruption in instances. Within that milieu, a small company like ours has trained over 120,000 youth till date, and we've placed over 50,000 in jobs. So you see the enormity of what could have been done. I mean, we are a trickle, within what could have been done and what is being done actually. So who did it really benefit? It benefited those with deep pockets, who could self-finance numerous large centers. Doesn't matter that they have to continue to pay rent and salaries through a period of COVID, they have deep pockets. And the Ministry of Skills Development and Entrepreneurship is guaranteeing them numbers so that they are able to cover their operational costs. It also helped those who could offer employment within their own organization to students that they trained. In effect, the government was subsidizing their recruitment costs. And that's not, I believe, the purpose for which Skill India was set up. But the best of the lot were those that could invest in high capex courses, crane operators, airline pilots. I'm joking, but you know what I'm talking about. The kind of courses that the government was not providing free, and which would attract students who would be self-paced students. And there you have a good case. So to my mind, what the system really could have done and should do as it goes forward is, one, change mindsets. That's the single most important thing. Two, it could have expanded TP's training partners' collaboration with industry and the private sector, which it did to a degree, but not really. Three, it could have created pathways for international mobility. There was so much talk about demographic dividend, but then if that demographic dividend is to be met, you have to know what international practices are. You have to know international systems for recruitment. How does Dubai recruit contract laborers vis-a-vis Singapore or whatever else? There should have been a systematic methodology, that determined and created these pathways for international mobility. And finally, I believe that it could have addressed women's low participation in the workforce. We are today doing GRAS, that is doing women's entrepreneurship through 5 ITIs in the vicinity of New Delhi. And we're doing about 700 women entrepreneurs, and we are actually putting them into entrepreneurial positions. But the scope of what can be done is apparent from the fact that in our workforce today of 395 million, just 92 million are women. And that's a crying shame for a country that is so up and about, in everything that we do. But the saving grace is that it does appear that there is hope with the new education policy 2020. Thanks a lot, guys. I hope this made sense to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Gautam. And I think while being critical of what has not been achieved, you have also pointed out what has been achieved. And to even strengthen it further, I think our biggest ray of hope as we move into the future is the digital space. And in the area of EdTech, I think Srinivas has done a lot of similarly precious work, like your work, Gautam, for the last many years. So let's listen to Srinivas for what this digital space can accomplish for India. Go ahead, Srinivas.
Thanks, Milind, and hi, friends. Today, I think that we had a very interesting reflections from Kumar, Suresh, Chacha, and Gautam. So they talked about education and education policy and what Kartik Muralidharan's take. So what I'm going to talk in the next 5-10 minutes is about what is the impact of EdTech in education. And I have some, what you can call credibility, because I have been in this space for last decade, full time. And fortunately, I touched upon various segments of society across the India and with all its plus and minus. So what I'm going to do is talk about the technology. What I'm not going to do is commenting on what should be the education and how it should be, because I'm not an educationist. I'm only a support to education. So first is that for any technology to be implemented, there has to be a base, a foundation. If you look at a few stats that are present, in the last 150 years, if you break 75 years and 75 years, there is a huge difference. India is highly illiterate and continue to be illiterate till 40s, where less than single-digit women are literate, and overall literacy is around 16%. Contrast that with 2011 census, where we have authentic figures, is 74% overall, 65% female. The gap is narrowed and overall literacy has gone up. And what, if the numbers to be believed, now it is moved up to 77, 78%, and the trajectory is upwards. So which means that there are so many literate people who have at least basic idea about learning. The second important statistic of what we look at it is the broadband connectivity, which is where again India is a unicorn in the world. Despite its challenges, 93% plus of the villages of 6.5 lakh villages in India have some form or other of a broadband connectivity. And 45% of the total subscriber base today is in the rural India. So it is a pervasive, the connectivity is available. The third interesting statistics we looked at it is these smartphones, which are essential today for the learning. And here again, India, in proportion to its population, is the number 2 country in the world having smart mobiles. We have 606 million smart mobiles users as of today. And more interestingly, in the recent visit to Wada, one of the tribal village in Maharashtra, I found that each family and neighbors use one smart mobile to do what they want to do, whether it is a payment gateway or entertainment or even learning. So it is not just this 43%, you should look at it. Our smart mobiles are available. So this gives us a tremendous confidence that there is a platform that is available to us to move into the digital space. Having said that, what I found in my journey is education sector, unlike other sectors, is extremely complex and it's got a multiple touch points. And it's very difficult to define. But having said that, this is one construct by Granton, which I found it to be relevant, is broadly speaking, there is a government public sector and there is a private sector. And mostly in India, if you remove the top layers of the society, it's a government supported initiative. So the majority of our focus should be what government is doing or government assisted ones are doing. And they are primarily into schools, at the state level support, at the government level, central level support, and higher educations, which Gautam talked about. The private sector is emerging, and you have a formal setup and a non-formal sector. And in the formal setup, that you are getting schools, and then you are getting higher education institutions. Non-formal setup is again ballooning. You have preschool segment, coaching, multimedia schools, vocational training, material, content, and also now you have the app-based learnings. So this is the overall setup. And when we are talking about digitalization, we have to look at it that how a platform that can meet all these segments, which are totally different. Gautam talked about vocational, we'll talk about it later. They're all different type of people, different expectations, input outcomes, what Ishan talked about. So what is the basic paradigm shift? What I observed in this decade is that there is a tectonic shift that is happening. The major shift is from the institute-led to learner-led. Historically, it's all a monolith. You have a superstructure of a college or an institute, and then you have a classroom, and then the people are learn in that. That is giving way slowly when I started the journey into early 2010s. Now, thanks to COVID, unfortunately because of COVID, but people got exposed to the online capability. And today we are moving into a learner-led, where a learner can demand and consume what sort of a learning they need, which is through the both face-to-face learning and online learning. Fortunately, I think many speakers spoke about the NEP 2020, and if one has got time to read it, it's a very, very interesting policy document, which clearly lays ground rules of why digitization is important and where all the digitization should help. That's, I think, is more important. The Ishan talked about the proof of the pudding is in implementation, and they give a clear directions, clear directives on where digitization should do it. And if one goes by that, I think next decade we see a concrete movement on a blended education framework. So looking at this scenario, we are very excited. I think that there's a lot of EdTech, again, for the benefit of group here, it is not Byju's and upgrades. They are not EdTech. They are in the tuitions business. EdTech is creating a software-based and hardware-supported platform that will enable learning to happen. And we are in that space, and then I think that I'll focus on that area. I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of this whole framework, but then this is one of the framework we're building for the open school of the national, this one. So which is, I'll talk about it later. But essentially what it means is that we are doing a reverse, upside down. Earlier, you have an institute which is going to give the teaching. Now there's going to be a cloud at the center where all the digital properties, be it in the case of content, there is a student information, there's a faculty information, certification, everything that is essential for any education will be in a cloud. And we are going to create tables. Each table is a physical table. You have a faculty table, you have an admin table, you have a student table, you have a governance, you have a collaboration, you have a quality. So these tables represent the physical activities we need to do. And interestingly, this model allows adding and separating. So you can, on a need basis, you can combine or separate out and have a different scenarios. And this will enable educationists to pick up what services they need from the cloud and what tables to be combined where. And by doing that, we are really moving from an IIT campus, IIM campus, which we are used to a much more open system. So what I will do is that instead of again talking about the technology, if any of you are interested, I would love to talk on one-on-one. But there are 3 case studies I want to quickly present to you, which I'm again going away from the standard, what you read from the media. I mean, those are known. So I picked up a few samples, 3 samples to illustrate how a technology can help. The first one is what is known as a Mo School. Mo School means my school in Odia. So the state government felt that around 60,000 schools that they have need help, which are supported by government. So they came out with an idea that we need to build an ecosystem of alumni. There are a lot of Odias who are accomplished and who have gone all over the world, but Odisha remains to be a backward state. So what they said is that if those people somehow can contribute, can become part of the system. So they came out with a scheme, and where they said, if anyone contributes 100 rupees, the state will give 200 rupees, and those 300 rupees will be used for the upliftment of the schools. So that was the mission. They started about 4 years back. And Naveen Patnaik, being again one of the good CMs we have in the country, said that let us have a digital platform, and that's where we got involved, and then we worked closely with the government. And we have created a system which is very interesting. We have a very centralized moschool.in. I will give the URL to you people, and then you can see it at your leisure. This one is a common platform for the 60,000 schools you're talking about. And you can search your school very easily, and or you can do a random search, as Suresh would like to talk. So using that, you can navigate, you can contribute, you can do whatever the activities you want. So as you can see, there are 53,000 departments, 1,016 special schools, aided schools 3,000, spread across 37,000 villages. So the numbers are staggering. And at that time that we are not sure how many people will actually contribute. And as on last month, 5.5 lakh people have contributed. And they contributed around 700 crores. So the government has given 1,400 crores. So the kitty that is available for this project was exceeded 2,200 crores. But coming back to the system, when you go to the school, each school has got a website. All 60,000 schools have got a website. So when you go to that school, you are really looking at what the school is, what they're doing, and what are the events happening, their stories. So it has become a very friendly thing, which they can use it not only for this purpose, but they can use it for whatever purpose they want. And also there's an appeal from the headmaster that my school needs these things. There is a process behind the scene where the state missionary and the district missionary, they all get involved, approve and monitor. It's not that, it's a randomized open thing. So whenever there is a project that has been identified and approved, then it goes into the system and it is available for anyone to contribute. And once they do that, there's a full level of transparency right to the end. What is happening? Suppose that there is a 1 lakh that has been done for the sanitation. Using pictures, using progress reports, it is transparent to all the people, including the person who contributed. And what is the stage that is happening. So at any time, you can have intervention, you can get into it. So like I said, that the progress has been very good. In fact, it's more than what we hoped for. And then I think this is one of the model which can be used by anyone else. The second case study that I want to talk about is Bihar. I picked up Bihar because Bihar is not a bad word for all of us. I mean, it's very easy for us to say, use Bihar as a wrong example for everything. And we have worked quite a bit in the Bihar. And interestingly, that we have done a lot of large-scale online examinations for their universities. So that's when we found that there is an intention to move to a better system and more transparent system, more accountable system, and efficient system. And based on that, we have got a proposal from the BIPAD, that is a Bihar Institute of Public Administration and Rural Development, which is a nodal agency for the training and research of all the governmental bodies in the state of Bihar, and also they help in Jharkhand and also any other state that needs. So it is an excellence center. So what they said is that let us create a blended system where all the training can be done. There are a lot of challenges, logistics challenges, quality challenges, need challenges, and the training quality challenges, assessment challenges. So they said that why don't we put a system? So we proposed our framework to them and then they have accepted it. And right now we're already building it. It's at an advanced stage. And what again I found, this is where that people talked about the hope. Everyone left with a hope that we'll do better. And here we are talking at the grassroots level. There is a need, there is an understanding that digitization is the way, and they are adapting to this technology very fast. The third case study that I want to talk about is the National Institute of Open Schooling. It's the largest open school system in the world. In the late 80s, it has been started, and it is basically designed for the people who dropped out of the formal education for whatever reason. And those people, they're challenged, they got out of the system. So government came out with that. And this open school, interestingly, compares very favorably. This is where that we are shocked when we first got into it. Compares very favorably with the best educational pedagogy systems in the world, be it US or Europe or Japan or wherever. It has got a phenomenal amount of flexibility of choice of subjects when we do and the level of assessment. And it's really supportive to a self-learning, self-pacing. And 1.5 million students have already gone. Every year, 3.5 lakh students are going through it. And government also has identified that there's a huge scope to get into the people that were not into the standard CBSE or ICSE or a state board syllabuses. So this is where again that we have came out with a proposal. Ishan knows a bit about it, but I don't want to get into what system we are doing. But where one of the aspects of what we said is, how do we give the learning to these people? These are the people that were challenged, as we all know. So this gives an example of how technology can help these people. So just showing you the video.
Srinivas, how long
This
is
is
the
Raj's
video?
family. This is Raj. He is a first-generation learner. Raj gets no family.
Sorry, Milind.
Do we know how long the video is?
Milind, video will be 5 minutes. So should we show or no?
If everyone is
Show a
willing-
bit, Yanks. Show a bit. It's very interesting.
We'd like to see it, yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
Go
I
ahead.
think that you people, I'll keep on playing and then you shout when you think that you had enough.
Go ahead.
They help to study. For these underprivileged people, the school system has not worked out. They have dropped out for some reason. They are each at different learning levels. There is a fear of being reprimanded. They have low confidence, socially and intellectually. They have low attention span. For these people, self-learning might work better. What is Raj's math level? Or Seema's math level? Can you guess Samir's math level? They are all at different learning levels. The normal teaching paradigm is learning followed by assessment. For our target group, this does not work, because we cannot assume that they are all at the same level. To address this non-homogeneous group, we need to turn this paradigm upside down. We first assess the student. Now we can tell you his true math grade level. Then start at his comfort level. Slowly work our way up. A question like finding the side of a cuboid has many prerequisites. We need to know conversion from meter to centimeter. A 4th grade topic, how to calculate area of a rectangle. 5th grade, how to calculate volume of a cube. 6th grade, how to calculate area of combination figures. A 7th grade topic, concept of volume as area times height, concept of square root. 8th grade, formulating a quadratic equation setting the unknown as x, then solving. A 9th grade topic. These underprivileged students have had informal learning. They all have different loose blocks in their fundamentals. At Udlov Digital, we address this issue with our artificial intelligence engine. Some subjects, like math and languages, need cumulative learning. Topics of the current year build up on topics from earlier years. If any prerequisite is weak, the artificial intelligence engine automatically identifies the weak area and takes the user down to strengthen that. It systematically takes the user down to a level where he is comfortable, gives him unlimited practice questions at that level, and makes him internalize the concept. Then, slowly, helps him work his way back up. Each block of the pyramid is built up of micro-nuggets of learning. Each learning nugget targets a specific micro-concept. In each nugget, the concept is explained, and the student gets practice to internalize the idea. Collectively, they must enable the student to cover the entire syllabus. Our learner has low attention span, so the teaching video needs to be under 3 minutes. Our student is older and from a different background. An application video is needed to explain why it is useful to study this concept. To implement this micro-nugget learning system, we have identified over 25,000 numerical questions, 42,000 MCQs, 16,000 short answer type questions, 4,000 teaching videos, 8,000 help videos, and 1,000 demonstration and activity videos. The artificial intelligence engine supports math, English, Hindi, accountancy, data entry, and social studies. These subjects are also taught in the same systematic manner. Take English as an example. An NIOS question in English is: write 3 sentences about your cat. This would require many basic fundamentals to be built in.
Hey, Yank, you could stop the video, I think.
Nouns.
Yeah.
Could stop the video.
Yeah, I stopped.
It's good.
Fantastic, fantastic.
Excellent. Okay.
Excellent. Very
so
good.
I think with all the very thoughtful reflections, we should take the time to contribute ideas. So let's get into open discussion mode, and whoever wants to start talking, just remember the 3-person rule. Don't speak until 2 other people have spoken. That's all. Go ahead. Yeah, Raja.
Yeah, I mean, excellent choice, Vivi. Thanks for, making us aware of this, this podcast, and just fascinating, to listen to it, out on a walk, just listening to it, you couldn't stop it, right? It's the depth of understanding of the topic and the different dimensions associated with that, and how it's dissected and then brought together, the clarity of thought and reasoning behind it and the logic associated with that, and some of the recommendations, it's just, mind-blowing. So we really enjoyed the podcast for sure.
Good. Thank you, Raja.
Thank you.
Yeah, please go ahead. Any thoughts, any ideas, reactions? Kumar?
Yeah, I was talking to Raja before, and he had talked about the corporate board at the Seminole County, which is the school district there. And here I think we had talked about industry and education collaboration and so on, which, and again, in the US, it's widely, different, I guess. But maybe he could talk to us about that board and how something like that might work.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was in Orlando, Central Florida, the Seminole County Public Schools is one of the largest public schools in the country, network, about 65,000 enrolled students. So it's pretty large. It's like a massive operation, frankly, when you get exposed to the heart of it. But they had a concept called the advisory board, which informed the elected school board on various things and brought in best practices from the industry into the mix. And before making some major decisions, they would end up taking it through the advisory board, to consult and see if they missed anything in their decision-making process. So it is a very, very useful collaborative thing, entirely voluntary. So I was on that board for several years. I was also the chairman of the board for one of the years. So it was a great experience and something that I believe should be pursued everywhere.
Are there any ideas for what Gautam pointed out as a stigma against vocational education? And then any thoughts about the potential of the digital space or EdTech that Srinivas talked about? I think those two have a lot of potential. Yes, Vinita.
I agree with Gautam completely. There is a stigma about the vocational training, but the government has tried to, I think, address that is by introducing vocational courses at the bachelor's level. At the undergrad level, they have introduced vocational courses. And especially for those children, I mean, if we are actually going to look at those students who are capable of getting into the IITs and they are going to go into vocational courses, that will, I don't think, ever happen. I don't think can ever happen. But one of the things that they are doing is that, because see, the potential of every student is different. And there are some students who cannot make it to the level of, the degree colleges, etc. So for them, these kind of courses are very useful. And they are taking those courses. So for instance, I do know that the government introduced, say, bachelors in, what is it called? Computer technology. Bachelors in computer technology, and students who did not get into engineering colleges took up the bachelors in computer technology, and they have done pretty well in those courses. And sometimes you're getting admission in better colleges through this than into ordinary engineering colleges. I think what needs to be done is an emphasis on this closing of substandard engineering colleges, because many of them, when you're talking about, one mention has been made of absenteeism. There are no teachers. Where's the question of absenteeism? Their appointments are not happening in many schools and in many colleges, etc. Because, the approvals are not there. Government approvals are not there. There is a clamp on expenditure. The money is not being put into education by government. So the move generally has been of the government to move towards the, private sector, away from the, from the government public sector. So, and the question of, I think the stigma comes when it comes to a certain level, but for the vast majority, I mean, if somebody even goes and tells them, they don't understand. Most of the people in our country don't understand education at all. All that they are doing is, and then they are moving away from municipal schools. If they have the money, they will even take loan to get into the private schools and not
Vinita,
go into government schools.
Vinita, just a point about your resource constraint that you pointed out from the government.
Yes.
I noticed that the top 20 corporations in India seem to be contributing to 70% of the profits that the corporate sector makes. And that statistic tells me that if somehow we can provide incentives to these top 20 corporations to channel their funds towards primary education or vocational education, rather than what happens with the Birlas or the Tatas, that they have these high-profile educational institutions at the higher level.
Absolutely.
But they don't have anything at the grassroots level.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to hear what thoughts other people have about this way of relaxing the resource constraint.
One of the things the government did was to make few seats compulsory for for the grassroots level people.
Let's
That's our key.
Yeah.
Let's stick to the rule of 3. So somebody else.
Okay. So, Milind, let me tell you, this is something very interesting because Gautam also pointed it out. You know, we have a driver, and in Bombay, his son, he has 3 sons. One son went to Mazagaon docks. He got an apprenticeship. He was there for some 3 years, and then of course when the apprenticeship finished, he was laid off, and then he was brought back as a trainee employee. So, I mean, the apprenticeship scheme itself is the method where the industry is forced to train people. Maybe they are just coming and standing and looking at the machine because they are not allowed to touch it in the beginning. But later on, after they have spent time, they become the raw material for fresh employees whenever they are needed, or because they have been in Mazagaon docks, they go and, do you know, if you go to Koliwada in Sion, they will have 6 and 7-year-old children who start working in the mechanic shops. And by the time they are 12 or 13 or 14, they are able to open the car engine and overhaul it. All this is an informal apprenticeship. So I really don't understand where is the problem. Because we are trying to evaluate the formal way of doing it, we are saying kuch nahi hota hai, bahut kuch ho raha hai. You see the air conditioner, the man who comes to repair the air conditioner in the house, along with him he has a lanky. What is the lanky doing? He's carrying his bag, he's carrying the the gas to be charged, and then he opens it up, he shows the light. And in the next year, the ustad hasn't come. This guy has come to do the cleaning and the servicing of the air conditioner.
Anjali wants to say something.
Yeah, so I will, Sandeep, I agree with you in many ways. And what you're describing is the informal apprenticeship method. So a company which has done this very well is the JCB company. And what they do is they have a chotu. When the crane is driven, when the digger is driven, there's a driver and a chotu. Over time, the chotu is capable of driving the digger. But what the company has done is that they have created funds so that the driver can eventually buy his own crane and become an entrepreneur, self-employed. Then this chotu becomes the driver. So the systematic process, which was implemented by the chief executive of JCB, expanded his own business. More and more JCBs were bought. More and more drivers were created. More and more entrepreneurs were created. The best of those went on to have 3 or 4 JCBs. Now, the problem with somebody like Mazagaon Docks is that it is dependent on an informal system where somebody gets an apprenticeship and then may get a job. The plumber or the auto mechanic may become good, etc. But there is no entrepreneurial system to make these people an entrepreneurial chain. They don't understand funds flow. They don't understand cash flow. They don't know how to run a business. And if you look at the difference in a country like Brazil, where you have chains of beauty parlors, these beauty parlor people have become enormous. They have beautiful chains. They run, the women have become very rich. They franchise. Over here in India, every single woman, you go to any village, there'll be 3 or 4 little beauty parlors. They'll only run one. Even that they don't know how to manage. The mother-in-law calls them, the daughter-in-law calls them, the child calls them, they shut the shop and go home. They are dirty, they are not hygienic. You look at the barber shops, everywhere there's a barber shop. Do we have a chain of barber shops? So the missing system is an entrepreneurial system to give these people formal instruction on how to become self-employed and run a company.
I agree, but Anjali, are there any ways to organize such an entrepreneurial system across the country?
So some NGOs are doing it, Milind, but let somebody else speak. Some NGOs are doing this very well, but it's the scale is absolutely terrible. And the mindset of entrepreneurship, people are self-employed because they have no option. But do they want to be an entrepreneur?
What does Gautam think about this?
So there are lots of little efforts being made across the country. When you hear a case study like the JCB study, it's so lovely to hear. And you wonder why 5,000 other people didn't pick up on it. But the reality is that 5,000 other people didn't pick up on it. In a sense, we are told constantly that historically, we are an entrepreneurial society, that we've always been traders. But where is the sign of that, in the manner in which we are treating our people today? Anjali is absolutely correct. He does, in large part, he does an entrepreneurial piece of work because he can't get a job. Give him a government job, he'll run away. He will pack his ready up, throw it away, and go into that government job. So, we are a nation in which mindsets need to be changed in a lot of ways, not the least of which is our social fabric.
Yeah, Sharath, go ahead.
I was going to say that much like mindsets have changed around things like computers, digital training, which has suddenly become from out of nowhere. It is seen as being glamorous and seen as source of income and higher incomes in the future, compared to the other trades, if you like. And I'm saying, to some extent, computer programming is a trade. It's a skill. It's not education as education defined in a classic manner. Yet, because the outcomes in terms of income levels, outcomes in terms of prestige, and outcomes in terms of acceptability by society is very different. And Gautam is right about changing mindset, but the mindset is not going to change overnight. It's a question of if the income flows to that sector, if the income flows and there is money in that business coming through for the individuals, they will go to it, Gautam. And that's the challenge that we have, that the low skill job, what we call low skill or skill jobs, they don't get the kind of level of income. And that applies, if I may say so, and I know we've got university professors here, but that applies even to the teaching profession in India. It's the kind of incomes that teachers can hope to achieve drives off the best. It doesn't get the best again. There is a stigma attached to being a teacher in India. What has he done? He's a school teacher.
I will add to what Sharath is saying. I will tell you about 3 things in Calcutta which I am seeing. Number 1, as the Uber demand is growing, people are getting trained as drivers.
Yeah.
Number 2, we have many housewives who have started doing private tuitions because women are not able to teach the students at home, their children at home. They are sending them to those ladies who are maybe just higher secondary pass, are elderly, their children are well settled, and they are doing it. And
go ahead.
Third is cooks. Bengali cooks are traveling all over the world. I don't know how, but jahan bhi jao, you have Bengalis who have become cooks.
Bengali cooks and Muria plumbers have dominated the ecosystem. But that's because one plumber from a village gets another plumber. But I'll tell you, if you want an institutional response, okay?
Correct.
Like, for example, in Skill India, there are some 4,000 job classes. Gautam would know better than me exactly how many there are, but they're huge. So what I requested someone to do is fascinating. I wish I had a copy of that to share. I said, divide this into 2 things. One is social acceptability, means what is his marriage index? Okay, I mean, how easy is it for him to get married? If he's a driver versus a crane operator. And second is the income index. And third is the demand index. So actually, people know what the answers are. That's why I'm saying implementation is key. So you take all these job classes, you know that, if a guy is a carpenter, okay, it's more difficult for him to get a wife, than if he is a computer technician. Okay, that's the social aspect. Then there's the money aspect. Like, for example, the government loves people to create construction workers. Why? Because of Minigra and all that. You can give 7,000-8,000 rupees, 8,000 rupees.
Sorry to interrupt you. Sorry to interrupt you, Ishan. I think the professor is already left or he is leaving.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to close this in 30 seconds.
No, but if he's there, then you can speak. Otherwise, okay, I think he's already left. Continue, Ishan.
Okay. So the other thing is the income aspect, where like politicians, everybody, why is Skill India creating so many people in construction? Because Nitin Gadkari is making roads. These guys can give them 8,000 rupees a month and they can tell their constituency, I've given you a job. So therefore, that's the other aspect that comes from demand. So you have to also categorize where is the demand, what is the approximate income. So we know, for example, that we have 1 million cybersecurity professionals short. Okay, 1 million. That's not a small number because of legislation and because of need. Okay, nobody is training cybersecurity professionals in India. All the cops and the army are getting employed. So not enough, Sharat. I have the data. Okay, not enough. Okay, so all I'm saying is that when you know there's a gap, you create 2 million cybersecurity in 3 years, they'll all get employed and get employed at 60,000 instead of 7,000 in construction. So there are answers. I don't want to talk. There are institutional answers. The will to implement and execute at the state level is key because it's not a center subject. Education is a state subject.
So Ishan, to react to that, I'm wondering if this entrepreneurial spirit that you all talk about, how do you get these guys to learn the trades that they need to be learning? I wanted to ask Srinivas, if this learner-led model that you talked about, is there any potential for exploiting that for creating state-level cells like you did in Bihar or in Odisha to try and get these entrepreneurs organized? And
before Anjali chips in, let me say that I can't talk about the education outcomes because I think that's beyond my skill set. But what I see is that the technology, digital technology is doing wonders in every aspect of a common person. Today, be it in the finance sector, be it in entertainment sector, be it in so many other sectors, the common man, my watchman, my driver, or the person outside, person in my village, they're all getting benefited today like never before. I think there is a huge transformation in quality of life and the choice of life. People are able to get at affordable levels across the segments. That I think is, to me, is a single most winner of a digital things. I mean, removing the fancy things, what Sharat said. I mean, there is a fancier aspect about automating computerization and modeling and blah, blah. But at the very grassroots level, education similarly can get a huge benefit by technology. And it's happening. The good news is it is happening. And like examples I said, only a few of them, but it is right across, it's happening. But ultimately, I think I strongly buy the Gautam's point of view that the dignity and the mindset has to change. I think that is a getting out of this framework, what government is doing, policy and technology, blah, blah. I think that Gautam, when he hit a thing on the nail, I mean, there is a huge caste system on what profession is what, and then everyone goes into that. I think that mindset, if it changes, I think India is going to be a great country. Thanks, Gautam.
Just one point from my side.
Sharat.
Quickly, it's about what Yanks just said. Think about this whole startup business. This didn't exist 20 years ago. Today, you talk to a kid and he wants to run a startup. I mean, what I'm saying, the rewards is what drives people, and then the visible rewards and outcomes is what drives people to doing something willingly rather than being pushed into doing something. To the point of training and skilling, and especially when it comes to skills and training, if there is a reasonable reward at the end of it all, that's what's going to drive it.
I think Anjali wanted to say something. I stopped there.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm going to bring this back to the people in this group and say that actually the JCP model was designed by an IIT Kanpur guy called Bipin Sondhi, whom some of you may know. He was the chief executive of the company. He used his thought process to create this entrepreneurial system. Take Urban Clap. What we're talking about is plumbers, these beauty workers, so on and so forth. Urban Clap, which is a large company in India, digitally enabled, has made it possible for these people to get assignments from customers through the net. It's like an Uberization of these individual workers. So these are entrepreneurial thoughts which have come from the grassroots level. And as Sharad said, they are getting investment money. But if we really want to catalyze this further, using technology, how can you move this needle on so many things that we can see? For example, on construction workers, there's no Uberization yet, but it is possible. If somebody here has that idea, they will be able to get funds and they will be able to create an Uberization. It's happened for the plumbers and the carpenters and the painters, etc. But it has not happened really for construction, and it is a crying need. That entrepreneurial mindset will not come from the grassroots. That entrepreneurial mindset needs an IIT, IIM, some credibility to actually put into place, because they have access to the creamy layer and the government contacts. They can dream big, but they need to have that mindset of wanting to raise the others. See, Kaya has done it. Kaya from Mariwala has done it for beauticians, but the money has gone into their pocket, not into the beautician's pocket. So there's some gap here, which maybe if people communicate well, they can create both the opportunity and the aspiration.
Thank you.
I will just add 2 points here to what Anjali has so beautifully explained. One is Urban Clap is damn good. But let me tell you my experience of using Urban Clap. जो आदमी आता है ना काम करने, वो बिल्कुल निकम्मा होता है. उसको काम आता ही नहीं. वो he comes, उसका फिक्स है, उसको 200 रुपए देने हैं. वो आएगा, देखेगा, कुछ आपको गोली दे देगा, 200 रुपए लेके चले जाएगा. Next time I'm not going to call Urban Clap, let me tell you that. Because the person who has come has not been evaluated. He doesn't have a license. What Gautam said was training people, giving them after an apprenticeship or training, etc., some certificate so that this man knows the job. Otherwise, there are so many villas moving around claiming themselves that they know the job. They come, they don't do the job, and they get a bad name, whoever uses them. So I think there's a need for formalization of what, as Anjali said, somebody needs to do it, but does not digitization. You also have to skill the guy. उसको इम्तिहान लो, उसको टेस्ट लो, ताकि उसको पता तो होना चाहिए ना काम उसको.
चाचा क्या होता है ना? So okay, just quickly to revert to you, since you're taking an example of Urban Clap. I mean, see, I also use Urban Clap, and I've been using it for long, and I continue to use. But you rightly pointed out, you get a third-rate people many times, and so over a period of time, I use them only for the third-rate work. I mean, I also have third-rate work, and so I get it done because it's convenient for me, and they're easily available, and they're very well defined. Cost is defined, everything is defined. Now, why it is not scaled up like the way Uber, which you right example you have taken, where again there's no great training or great this one, but it's really got the things. Why so many other apps which have got a traction is because the app itself is becoming sufficiently accepted by the people. And that's sort of I don't get a bad quality driver. I use a driver on hire for the driver. I don't have a permanent driver with me. And they always send a good quality driver to me. This is my experience for the last 2 years. So I think there are a lot of good things moving, Chacha. And yes, certification is important, quality is important. But at the same time, technology is important and convenience user is important. And the dignity, again, I'm coming back to the main point. I think that sort of like it will trigger more good quality people getting into it. First of all, the good quality people don't get into it. They want to become some data entry operators for Amazon because that's high paying. So I think that problem will get solved. I mean, they do a third-rate work in Amazon back office. And compared to that, maybe a good plumber may give a good satisfaction. So I think that's a combination of points what you are talking about.
By the way, Urban Clap is moving in the right direction, I feel. They've
Gautam.
changed name to Urban Company.
Gautam,
Gone away from this whole clap business.
let Raja speak. He's been.
Yeah, so I think, so the whole idea that Anjali, just talked about, the Uber equivalent kind of apps, technology enabled, that's really taken off quite well in the US, in fact, quite a few apps that do that. It's called House, it's called Jobber, it's called Angie's List, and there are many others as well that, list and provide the ability for people to match each other's needs, with services that people want to offer. And one of the good things about these apps is that, it identifies and over a period of time highlights, who is doing good jobs, right? So there's a rating system that is used. And so that is similar to Uber, right? And there's a rating system, and that really helps the process over a period of time for you to then look at that, look at the reviews, have the ability to talk to some of the people who have used the services before and things of that nature. But it's a very quick way of getting the response for some need that you have, and for those people to find the opportunities. And that economy, generating kind of method, I think automatically creates the need for people to skill up as well so that they can be rated well, right? So there's a self-learning aspect of that it drives, that is not training driven, but it's rather self-driven.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Raja. Does Suresh?
I'm stopping the recording, but we can continue.
Yeah, does Suresh or Kumar want to say something? You have